Hello and welcome to the Neurodivergence and Mental Health podcast. My name is Sally Nilsson and I'm a psychotherapist, published author, public speaker and mum. I discovered my autism and ADHD aged 56 in March 2021, and having rewritten my life story, I'm on a quest to advocate for neurodivergent community. I hope you enjoy listening to my incredible guests sharing their experiences of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette's and OCD. We talk about growing up, education, work and personal stories, and how mental health has played its part in shaping lives. Our conversations cover spectrums, traits, challenges, acceptance and successes. So sit back, relax and find out what it means to feel, think and be different in a neurotypical world. So hello Eoin, and I'm delighted to meet you. Together we're on the Autistic Counsellors and Psychotherapists Facebook group, and I seem to be following you around different platforms and podcasts, and I love what you say. I've been very interested in the work you do. And so what I'd like to do to start with, if I may, is just to ask you to do a quick introduction, your name and roughly where you live, county, country. So over to you, please, Eoin.
Hi, Sally. Yeah, lovely to be here. And my name's Eoin Stephens and I'm Irish. I'm from Dublin. I now live just at the next county out from Dublin, County Kildare, and work in both counties. I have a practice in a couple of different places. So I'm a counsellor and psychotherapist, and I also provide supervision to other counsellors, psychotherapists, and I do a good bit of training as well. I used to lecture, but now I just do some kind of CPD training workshops with other therapists.
So thanks for that. And just tell me a little bit what you do in the realms of neurodivergence.
Well, currently, my main work is private practice. Now, I've a history of various other, different kind of balances of work. For a number of years, I was primarily in the education field with counsellors and psychotherapists. I was, helping to run a training college. So I was doing lots of lecturing and lots of management and only a little bit of private practice. But last 5 years or so, I've gone very much solo. Suits me as an autistic person. I do a bit of training, do supervision, but the bulk of my work is client work with a range of issues. And I've been sort of edging into working more and more with autistic people, being autistic myself.
Yes.
It's 10 years ago or so realized I'm autistic. So I've been generally pretty slowly kind of making that part of my work. But the past couple of years, and particularly the past year, I've just rapidly dived into that area. I mean, it's growing so rapidly and the need is so huge. So currently, I'd say 3/4 of my clients are autistic adults, are people who are pretty sure they're autistic or who are exploring that, they may be autistic, with all the issues that go with that, anxiety and relationship issues and life decisions that need to be made and all sorts of other things that we all have. But yeah, largely my work these days is specifically trying to learn how to work specifically with autistic people, because I think we're all on a learning curve around that, really.
We are, and they certainly say, and it is true, isn't it? When you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Absolutely. And that's the truth of it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, I ask the question normally, what is your neurodivergence? And you've told me you're autistic. Do you have any co-occurring differences? And tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about, your diagnosis. Did you say 10 years ago? Just give me a little bit of information about your journey, because my guests have certainly told me it can be really hard, really horrible, or very easy. What was your journey like?
Well, it was mixed, I suppose. Largely positive. The way it went for me was, I don't have other co-occurring issues that I'm aware of. So I've struggled with various mental health issues along the way, social anxiety and occasional depression, and bits of addictions. But other than that, I'm not aware of other neurodivergences apart from autism. But I suppose the way it went for me was that a bit over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago or so, I was beginning to find the hints of some autistic clients in my practice. I think it was, again, beginning to shift a little bit in the world back then, but only a little bit. And it was really clients I knew a little while who began to talk about, a bit of, having, an autistic family member who, were, talking about, kind of things that were sort of OCD, but not quite OCD, those kind of, particularly intense kind of patterns around order and things like that. And, I mean, I didn't know a lot about autism in those days. Who did, in a way? But I was curious about it. I mean, of course, it runs in my family in retrospect. I didn't really know that at the time, but again, there had been hints of it, at least around a family member at one stage. Again, in a time when nobody was really clear about it, or there wasn't much diagnosis, certainly of adults. So I was curious. I suppose I'm a curious type. I thought, this is interesting. And, one client, two clients, three clients over the space of a couple of years. We began just to talk about it, and we began to just speculate together on, could autism be relevant for you? And so in a way, they were exploring it as I was exploring it. And almost together, we found our way into, in the case of, as I said, maybe 3-4 clients, this fits. And I don't think at that point any of them got a diagnosis or were interested in getting diagnosis, because as you know, that varies. Plenty of my clients since have done or have come to me with the diagnosis, but they definitely embraced that aspect of themselves as a person and thought that's really helpful. God, it never occurred to me that I might, even though my brother is autistic, that never occurred to me that I would be, but this really makes sense. So I found it very productive with a few clients. And then almost one day, but not literally one day, but just over a space of a week or so, I started to think, God, it kind of fits me a bit, I'm reading this up, Tony Atwood and people like that, and thinking, God, it's funny the way we're a very autistic kind of family, and this really fits. And then literally on one particular day, the whole thing flipped 180 degrees, and by the end of the day, I was just thinking, that's it. That's completely clear. And I think the bit for me that helped it be a very positive experience was I was well into adulthood at that stage. I had done a lot of my own therapy. I'd worked on a lot of issues. I'd really worked a lot on self-esteem. I was in a reasonably good place in my own, mental health and my own sense of self. Though, interestingly, I always felt there was something missing. I felt there was something very fundamental missing. I really had that sense. And then I thought, no, but this was it. So it was like, literally, that was it. I thought, it pretty much all makes sense now. And you know yourself, I had that experience then for weeks and months afterwards. Oh, that as well. And oh God, that thing that happened to me years ago. And that thing that I struggled with, and that. And they all just fit this. And this is great. So by and large, it was positive. Now there were some buts in that, but by and large for me, it was really just a very growthful, positive, helpful experience.
I really think, I identify so much with that, Eoin. And it's almost exactly the same journey, really. But what was happening within my practice was that I was getting clients that were coming in who seemed really highly sensitive to so many things. They might have had anger outbursts, they might have been crying, they didn't fit in, and they were having shutdowns and meltdowns, and they're having quite explosive and dramatic things that I hadn't really come across before. And actually that sent me on the route to polyvagal theory, which I was very, very interested in. And then again, I started seeing more clients. I started reading up Tony Atwood, Edward Halliwell for ADHD, all sorts of different areas, until I read a book, Divergent Mind, and my goodness, that came right back and bit me on the bottom. And I cried my eyes out, actually, because I thought, that is me. And then I went on a different journey. And since then, I've done hundreds of hours of research to understand clients, understand myself, have some therapy, but it's such a similar journey. It really, really is. So what was it like for you growing up, you know, like within the family and school and then into the workplace?
Well, it's an interesting one, that, because again, it's something I see with clients. It's like, you know, I found family life pretty good and felt,
Yeah.
in a sense, very at home at home. Now, I'm not saying there were never any issues, but I did find that, again, a bit of a puzzle as a client myself in therapy, because I really felt that I didn't have huge amount of family issues, you know. Now we all have issues, and I did plenty of work on both parents. There was another interesting part of my journey into discovering that I was autistic was I was back in therapy with a new therapist for maybe a year before that, and she didn't know anything about autism or neurodivergence, but she was just a very good therapist and very supportive, and it was partly true, again, re-looking at both my parents that also helped me, you know, discover my own autism. And then she was really supportive when I discovered it. So that was a very positive experience. And, you know, she went on her own learning journey, the therapist. But, you know, I you know, found that, like, for instance, one of the things I sometimes explore with clients is, you know, where would they have done a lot of their masking? And with some clients, they would have felt they needed to do a lot of masking in their family, but a little less outside if they, you know, find a niche, you know, find a set of friends. And others, it's the other way around. But for me, it was definitely the other way around, in the sense that I felt generally pretty safe and pretty comfortable within my family setting, and was happy to spend a lot of time within my family setting.
Can I just ask you on that point before we go on to school, because on the family setting, and you saying that it was good and it was a happy family and you felt, you know, calm and you had good mental health within the family, were you seeing a therapist at that point within your family before school?
No, I wouldn't.
Oh, I see. Okay, so please carry on with your story.
Yeah, no, not until later in life that I would have gone for therapy. But no, I wouldn't have had need to. Now, like, I would have been known as an anxious child. I mean, I might not have known that at the time that I was known as an anxious child, but my mother said it about me looking back. You were always an anxious child.
Yeah.
And I always had, you know, tummy upsets and, you know,
right.
indigestion and that kind of thing. And
that's polyvagal, isn't it?
All of that, you know, and I was shy, friendly, but shy, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, like, in retrospect, you know, my family is quite an autistic kind of family. So we were sort of happy together, and we all liked reading a lot, and we all liked nature a lot. And, you know, we weren't that into what a lot of other people were into. So I often felt more, you know, myself within my family, to be honest, than outside of it. And always get on with everybody. But by and large, I did feel, you know, that I belonged there, if you like. I mean, that's one of the big issues, I think, when you're autistic, is not feeling you belong. But no, I felt like I belonged in my family. But school, well, yeah, I mean, school was mixed. In some ways, I was intelligent and liked a lot of the subjects, and so in some ways, of course, school was a great experience, you know, as in, you know, I got praise for being good at things. But in other ways, it was very, very hard. And, you know, in retrospect, like, at the time I wouldn't have known it, but in retrospect, I had a string of friends, which is interesting. You know, I didn't have any friend from the start of primary school to the end of primary school, or any friend from the start of secondary to the end of secondary. I had friends, but it was always different friends as the years went by, you know. Clearly that was a difficulty for me. My father told the story that my parents are passed away now, but my father used to tell the story. All my brothers and sisters went to kindergarten, you know, they went to and loved the lady who ran the preschool. My sister, I have an older sister and then some younger siblings, but, you know, I was the second to go. But my father had a feeling, and he brought me in and introduced me to the lady who ran the preschool. And then he went and he sat in the car. And a few minutes later, I came running back out again, and I never went back. He said that he was very clear. I was not interested. I was not going back.
How fascinating. What a difference.
I mean, that's only whatever, you know, 3.5 years old, you know, but it's just so interesting that right there and then I was obviously thinking, this is not really my scene, you know.
And he waited in the car as well. And I love that, because that does show such a connection within the family, being happy and connected, that, you know, you understood each other. You could possibly see if the environment wasn't quite right, or the sounds were too noisy, or, you know, and you have this perception and intuition that somebody else within the family unit wasn't feeling so great. How many siblings have you got, by the way?
There's 6 of us all together.
So you're a big family. Yeah. So what happened after that? Tell me more about your sort of younger schooling.
Well, you know, as I said, school was mixed. You know, in some ways I liked school because, as I said, I was, you know, actually quite keen on you know, learning. Still, in fact, my main passion, learning. But you know, and so school was interesting in many ways. But of course, you know, that meant I was a bit of a swot. You know.
Yes.
And a nerd, and you know, teased for that and so on. But it wasn't bad either in some ways. You know, only in retrospect that I see just how anxious I always was, and how the world out there just always seemed scary, you know, compared to home, you know. One thing that was really difficult for me was the transition to college, from secondary school to university.
That's interesting, because I found sort of 14, 15 was really hard, and college was easier. And I know year 9 can be hard as well. But for you, you're saying that it wasn't that. It was going on to college at around sort of 16, was it?
Yeah, about 17.
What happened there?
Yeah, and you know, in retrospect, again, you know, my last couple of years of secondary school didn't go all that well.
Right.
In terms of, like, because I was a top student and became a slightly less than top student, you know. But then I would have just attributed to the fact that I was having a bit of a good time and rebelling and hanging around with a slightly you know, more drinking crowd or whatever, you know. But I'd got enough, you know, to go to college. So but in retrospect, I was kind of losing myself a bit, you know, unsure about where I was going. But yeah, college, I found university overwhelming. You know, I went to the biggest university, you know, in Dublin, University College Dublin, UCD, had moved to they'd built this massive new campus, yeah, I found it overwhelming. It wasn't, again, the subject matter, you know, that wouldn't be the problem area for me, the academic side of it. It was this massive world where you were supposed to find your own way, and there was very little guidance, none at all, when it came to the social side. It wasn't like you were in a class with the same people all the time. You were, you know,
not the same structure, great big gaps in between. I mean, the working on your own probably would have been okay, but it is that it's so different. And of course, I don't know how good it is now, but it's that pastoral care. They didn't know. You just got to get on with it. It must have been so hard. What were any key moments where you may have come unstuck and really struggled, Eoin?
Well, you know, it's an interesting piece for me, that particular transition, or failed transition, if you like. I mean, basically, I went to do a science degree, and I was going to be a teacher, and I couldn't complete first year science, and then I took a year out, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, but because that was interesting. But you know, I mean, I told my parents I was struggling, and again, you know, I've mentioned my father, my mother in particular. You know, she used to look back on that years later and say, you know, you were depressed then. We didn't really know it, but you were. And now neither of them ever knew that I'm autistic, because they passed away by then. But certainly, you know, she again would have done her best to understand, you know, any of us struggling. You know, she was very ahead of her time that way. She'd read up on things, you know, but they did. I said I was struggling. I said I couldn't hack it, and I had just really stopped going to lectures, you know, and I was just going in there, and I asked, could I stop going? And they said, well, could you finish the year? Didn't really want to, but, you know, I did. I went in and finished the year. I actually made a few friends, you know. I was lucky. I ran into a few other odd bods, you know, and made a few friends, and even hung on to them, even though I didn't go back to science. I went back to psychology after a year out. But, you know, I really just, it was like, in some ways, I think, a classic autistic feeling. I just felt like an alien in that place. It felt like, I mean, it's not like I was in a foreign country or something, you know. I was in Ireland, in Dublin, where I'm from, you know, and yet somehow I felt like I was a ghost wandering around this big campus,
Yes, yeah.
with no connection to other people, and they were all living some other life. And of course, the classic, again, autistic thing, seemed to know how to do it.
And speaking a language, and all the banter and the sort of superficial chat and the small talk, and all the programs they're watching, the music they're into, just the hopping about from subject to subject. And it's a sensory overload, and it's a different language, isn't it?
It is very different. And of course, in retrospect, I could see my, need. And this is what I did find with just a few people, at least some of them in retrospect, again, maybe even autistic. But what I needed was the info dump kind of conversation, the absolute ability to talk about something you're intensely interested in, including the subjects we were studying, of course, which nobody talked about, that kind of thing, just to really get into things. And I did find a bit of it, fortunately, with people, but I just couldn't get a handle around the whole kind of structure, social and academic, of this confusing place, and yes.
And what happened after that? Because you were saying to me something happened after that was quite significant for you.
I've been lucky along the way, I have to say that. I've met great people and I've had great opportunities, so I've been lucky. I think I've been luckier than some, I have to say. I'd like to just put that out there and be grateful for it, I mean, I had no idea what I was going to do.
Yeah.
I went and did a bit of, kind of construction type work or whatever with an uncle of mine, just for a few months to earn a bit of money, and I did a few things. I had no idea what I was going to do. But then, I was a bit fed up with that, and I didn't really need the money, I had enough for whatever I wanted at that age, and I still had a good bit of the year to go. And I thought, why don't I see if I could do a bit of voluntary work somewhere? So I was always that type,
Yes, yeah.
Altruistic type, and like to be involved in causes, So I didn't quite know what to do, but I just basically knocked on the door of a local, institution where they worked with people with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome and so on.
Oh,
I said, would you like somebody to do a bit of work? They were very surprised, young man in particular, saying, do you want to? So they looked at me slightly dubiously, but then decided to said, why not? Yeah, give you a chance. They had lots of young men there, so they felt, we could do with a man. Most of our staff are female, And I started just doing some voluntary work there. I absolutely loved it. I was never so happy in my life. And
how old were you? Were you sort of 21, 22?
I was about 20, yeah. And you
fit right in.
Oh, totally fitted in. I mean, in retrospect, again, it's fascinating. Just fitted right in with these outsiders and people who were seen as not normal and not part of.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And people used to say, God, you're great to do that. I was just loving it. Couldn't wait to get in each day.
Natural environment.
Totally loved working with those people. And then I started to think, well, what do I need to do? And I went and saw the guidance counselor from my old school, who I had gone on very well with, and he said, well, why didn't you do psychology then?
Yes.
Thought, oh my God, yeah, why not? So
sometimes you just need somebody else, because you're in the middle of doing it. It's an action thing, but you're not aware that actually you've got a strength, and sometimes you need somebody else just to point it out, don't you?
Yeah. So I mean, I did a psychology degree. It was a struggle. I was back in the same place.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
It was tough, and in various ways, but I got through it, kind of only barely at the end. But I loved some of it, and again had some began to fit in a bit, like particularly when this class got smaller in second year. I felt, no, this is cool, this is exciting, this is interesting, these are interesting people, but I didn't go and then become a psychologist. I simply continued to work in my role with people with intellectual disabilities. I was a house parent, I was a social skills instructor, things like that. And you were
gaining a lot more experience and knowledge by studying at the same time of doing it, and that must have been amazing, because you were hands-on, using life experiences and observing and seeing what you were seeing. But then you were doing all the education side of it. And you, I mean, I know this from client work, thinking, my God, I could have helped so many people before, but I didn't have the knowledge. So it must have been really interesting that you were being educated. It's like being an apprentice almost, and doing it on the job.
Absolutely. It was fascinating. And of course, I was on my own kind of education journey, being autistic. I was kind of, in a way, learning what I wanted to learn,
Yeah.
because I would be generally highly critical of education a lot of the time. A lot of it
Yes.
is you get taught whatever somebody kind of wants to teach you, maybe rather than what you need. But anyway, it depends on just who's on the staff, and they're not necessarily good teachers either. But anyway, we won't bother going down that track.
Yeah.
But no, I was very lucky, because I think I would have got even more lost. Now, I got pretty lost in my 20s. Like, when I tell my own story, and I mention it, for instance, in one of my blog posts, was the sheer personal loneliness. I mean, I left home, got a bed sit, was working in this particular job and loving it. But, college was over. The college connection with some friends was gone. I didn't really know how to maintain friendships.
Yeah.
And they were built around the pub. Now, I drank a good bit in my late teens and in my 20s, and eventually gave it up because I was drinking too much and too dependent on it. But a lot of my drinking was on my own, because I was just so lonely. Because
Yes.
I also found the pub a really difficult place, which is where everybody met, particularly in Ireland,
Because that's the same thing, isn't it? It's that, my favorite thing was sitting in a bar, up at the bar, smoking loads of cigarettes, drinking loads of pints of ale, and talking to the old crusty construction workers, the roofers, and the people like that. As soon as I left them and went off to try and join a group of women who are kind of my age, and all that conversation is going backwards and forwards, and they're talking about Strictly, well, it wasn't Strictly, but whatever it was in those days, I hated it. It hurt. It was painful. It was exhausting. And I would just end up getting drunk and making a fool of myself and going home in a mess, because I just couldn't, I couldn't do it. No. I couldn't do it. I could only do it when I was with older men who were in construction, and they were talking about politics, which I had no idea about, but I found it fascinating. Is that sort of experience you had?
Well, I think it is an experience I've had. And again, I sometimes mention it to clients to see if it validates their experience, and it often does. And that is that it's like when we're struggling with not knowing we're neurodivergent, during those, early adulthood, and, up to whenever we discover our more of our real identity. During that time, I think what's hardest for us is to connect with the people we're supposed to connect with, the people who we're supposed to be like, because we're not like them. Whereas we're trying to connect with people who aren't like us at all, it's actually much easier, because there's no pressure to be what, kind of the template, I often call it, that person. So I'm left college, I'm mid-20s, I'm Irish, I'm male, I'm middle class, I'm, whatever. So that means I'm supposed to like all these things.
Conform.
And then that means if I'm with those people, I find it really difficult, because I feel totally alien and not like that. Whereas or if I'm with people who are supposedly very different from me, then often it's quite relaxed, because I think, no, there's no expectation for me to be any of that. So I can drop the mask in a way, So,
I have to say that, I've had some such unusual friends. I've had the ones I'm supposed to have, which never actually worked out in the end, and then the oddballs. But I have to admit that I was quite ableist, really, because I would see people who were quirky or nerdy or geeky or unusual or wore funny clothes or acted in a funny way, and I would probably be a little bit scathing of them, because I was trying to fit in with this conformity thing.
That's it.
And I'm 56 now, and it's only now that I feel guilty about it, really, because that wasn't the real me, because I was very compassionate, and I did have some really interesting friends. And now to this day, I do have a mixture of friends, but it's a very small group. I don't feel the need to have a lot of friends now. I've shrugged off quite a few friends, because toxic is a funny word, but we're not going down the same path, and it's triggering and upsetting and everything. So it's just nicer to have a smaller group of friends. So can we, I'm just keeping an eye on time, because because you're such an interesting chap, and I've got so much I'd like to ask you, if that's okay. Sure. Is there anything you want to add there, or can we move on to the next bit?
No, absolutely fine.
Are you sure? Thank you very much. So, after this and doing psychology and going into a therapy practice, I'd like to ask, if I may, within your practice, tell us a bit about your clients. obviously not, confidentially or anything like that. But what I'm interested to know is, how many would you say, that you knew were neurodivergent to start with, or were they coming in with anxiety and other difficulties? You were saying this, you were touching on this before about them not fitting in, but you may have seen that they were having constant relationship breakdowns, they might have had addictions, mental health issues, and they didn't understand. They were coming and saying, I mean, this is my experience, I suppose, I don't know what's going on with my life. All this thing keeps happening time and time again. What's the matter with me? I feel as I'm going mad. And it's only through that therapy experience that things come out. We don't assess, we don't diagnose, we observe. But I'd love to hear your experience. What happened with you? Because there's obviously things like a lot of shame and guilt, blame, and low self-worth.
Oh, totally, yeah. And and kind of puzzlement, I think, as well, that sense of and yet I'm also capable, or and yet somehow why am I struggling so much with these things, and I suppose my experience has shifted over time, because initially in my practice, as I said, it was just a small kind of hint of a few people that this might be an issue, and I was a little bit curious, and then that triggered me going down my own track. And to be honest, I then I didn't push things along in my practice for a number of years. I didn't go the kind of, now I'm going to really focus on working with autistic people. I just still let it come as it came. Obviously kept more of an eye out for it, was a little more confident about what it means to be autistic, and slowly, just over time, every now and then a client would come to me and they'd be talking about social anxiety, or they'd be talking about struggles in their kind of trying to settle in a job, and the difficult experiences of the work politics were the problem, not the job, those kind of things. And I think wait a little while, get to know them, do a bit of work with them, but then in some cases after a while I'd be thinking there's a real feel of autism here, and I don't like the idea of not saying that in some way, because that's what I would want as a client, and so I would say something like, there's I'd wait till again we were on that theme of those issues, and I'd say then something like, it's almost like something a little sort of autistic-y to this or something. I don't know whether you think that, have you heard much about this? They're talking more about it these days. Now, the odd time with the client that would just, kind of sail straight by them, they'd kind of think, no, don't really think so,
Yes, yeah.
And, now they might come back later and think they've thought about it, but with most of the time, because I would bide my time before I'd be saying this, so most of the time I actually got either that's interesting, kind of what would you mean by that now? That's I'd like to look at that at least. Now, do you think it could be relevant? To be honest, quite often I got, some people have said that to me before, it's like, you little autistic, or I've wondered that myself sometimes, so really mostly I was pushing on a relatively open door, and we would then open it up and discuss it. And I would say, look, again, I'm not assessing, but, I can help you explore this, and I can help you decide whether this seems to fit and it's helpful for you, and whether we should work, a bit using this framework. And if you, at some stage, want to get an assessment, I can, give you guidance in getting that. Now, quite a few, very mixed, by the way, my experience. Clients, many haven't bothered getting an assessment. Many have, and it's been really important for them. But over the last few years, there's been a big shift in a way, if you like, in the other direction, in the sense that can still happen, what I'm describing, that clients are coming to me and gently at some point I bring that topic up if I think it might be relevant, or indeed other forms of neurodivergence, ADHD being the next most common one, I think, that I would find myself sometimes wondering about with the client. But in the last few years, I have put myself out there as somebody who specializes in this area. I,
Yes.
as well as my general Eoin Stephens website, I have a autism informed therapy website. I have, done a little bit of marketing and, a little bit of, training of counselors, and, I've become
Yes.
known to work with this. What I discovered, and I think it's similar in the UK, what I discovered is that I almost needn't have bothered with the marketing, because it's like there's so many adults out there who are in need of a therapist who's familiar with autism. Whether they're wondering about it and they hear about it somewhere, or they Google and they find me, whether they're recommended by another therapist because the issue comes up, but the therapist doesn't feel, confident in dealing with it, or of course, whether they've got already a diagnosis. I've got a number of referrals now from psychologists and psychological practices where they do assessments. So it's really flipped around, where it's not so often that I'm actually exploring that with a client now. A lot of my clients either come with the question or even with the fact that they're autistic,
And I get that, and I think we were talking about this before we came on air, and what I'm finding is I'm becoming more of a coach and a mentor, because sometimes there's anger, frustration. They're so scared about feeling abnormal or disordered or broken, and sometimes they don't want it. And I find myself saying, look, the therapy and the work that I do with you works with anybody, whether you're neurodivergent or not. But if they're interested in taking the journey, that journey is so important, isn't it? Because it could be the curiosity, it could be the wondering, it could be then going on to the assessment and then the diagnosis. And then, for goodness sake, afterwards, there's times in my life, and I have to admit that after I trained in the model of therapy, I felt a bit like I was thrown off the boat without a life belt.
Yeah.
You've done the course, you've got the diploma, off you go and you're gone. And I absolutely don't want that to happen to clients that come and see me, because it's such a complex and sensitive area of psychotherapy or coaching that sometimes it's that post area of therapy that's so important. I mean, I'm not sticking complete to the questions now, because you're covering so much of it within what you're telling me. But have you found that they've gone through the psychologist, they've done the assessment, they've got the diagnosis, or they already, they had it before, and they come to you and they sort of say to you, well, I know what I am now, but I don't know what to do with it. I've spent 38 years thinking I was one person, and now I'm somebody completely different.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I call it unpacking,
Yes.
It's like, yeah, you're, autistic, and you do identify with that, and you've had it confirmed, and you've read a little bit about it. But yeah, it's like, it reflects a little bit about what I've just been talking about, looking back on my life, all that unpacking where you identify that's where it was relevant, and that's why that was difficult, and that's why I find this thing currently difficult. And there's a strength that I'd forgotten about, that I need to bring back into the picture, because, because I don't have to, leave it out of the picture if I'm going to accept I'm autistic, because it's an autistic strength, and I'm beginning to embrace that I'm autistic. So that kind of unpacking, just for yourself, for the person, for themselves. Now, obviously, then that ties in a bit with unmasking, as in what you want to show of yourself that you haven't been showing. It leads us, I think, bang into the heart of low self-esteem, as you mentioned earlier. I think that's so often a huge piece of work, for people.
And what are people saying around low self-worth or lack of confidence, or, that imposter syndrome, that just feeling of not being good enough? What sort of things are people saying about themselves?
Well, I suppose, people, kind of realize that they learned to be somebody else, I think masking is the term that's often used. It's a limited term, and I think most people acknowledge that, sort of, people say adaptive morphing and camouflaging and all sorts of things.
Yes.
We develop a false self, and and you can't have self-esteem if you're living a false self, you know. So it's like people are kind of lost when at this stage that we're talking about, they're sort of lost between knowing they have to and want to leave behind a lot of that false self that they developed to live in the world, but they have very little idea how to find their way back to a more real self, you know.
It's almost like Stockholm. This has just popped into my head. It's like Stockholm syndrome on yourself, that you've almost been abusing yourself by conforming into a society's norm, and then now you're saying, look, shall we explore just having a look at who you really are? And it can be quite terrifying, can't it?
Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, that's why I, you know, kind of spent a good while at that really myself, you know, before I, you know, kind of did much changing in the world, you know.
Yes.
I think, you know, that, I suppose one way to put this, but that's my story. But I think, and you know, we've discussed this before, I think that also reflects the story of our culture. In other words, it wasn't just that it was difficult for me 10 years ago to do much about the knowledge that I'm autistic. It was more difficult for anyone 10 years ago, and it was a little easier 5 years ago, and it's a little easier now, and it'll be easier again in another 5 years, you know. So it's like a lot of clients, for instance, have big questions about where this leaves them with the people in their life, you know, their partner, their friends, their siblings, their parents. You know, it's like I can, you know, like we know this from kind of, you know, systems theory and family systems and so on. It's like,
I was just going to say that it's called internal family systems or parts therapy, and I'm reading up a lot about that now. That each family member has their own part to play, and within their own psyches, one day they might have anxiety being the predominant feeling, or low self-worth, or happiness, or anger. And it's very complex, isn't it? Because if you look at your own situation with 8 people in your family, if I can't do the maths, but if you add it all up, imagine all of that coming to the table. And we all have a right. We do have a right within a family and in a system to have your say, to be equal, to be listened to and validated, don't we?
Absolutely, yeah. And you know, I think that when somebody begins to change, you know, I think this happens when people go to therapy anyway, apart altogether from this particular, you know, client group like ourselves, you know, discovering in adulthood that we're neurodivergent. But, you know, when people go to therapy and start to think, you know, well, I have been actually making too many compromises, and I'm too people pleasing, or I'm whatever, you know, and begin to make changes, it doesn't suit everybody around them, you know. So I think this is again what a lot of neurodivergent people experience, is like, hold on, I'm being more myself, but it really doesn't actually suit everybody. They were used to the way I was, you know.
And at the moment, you know, I get that, and I definitely relate. Is we're moving house, and because we're moving to a smaller house, and we used to have a lot of stuff. I'm a bit of a hoarder, but I've been very ruthless and got rid of so many things. And some of the things were things like children's books and toys, which I've got a big emotional connection with them, and also some friends. But actually, since I've discovered my neurodivergence, I've changed. I've not become hard or anything like that. I've become sensible and responsible and understanding of myself and what my needs are for the future. And it's been easier to get rid of stuff, to unburden myself, to stop the shame and the blame, and keeping with friendships that weren't healthy, keeping objects that I didn't need, and moving on to a brighter time, because we're moving to a different county completely, in a different way of life. And I'm very excited about it because it's got more culture, it's more diversity, it's more alternative. Right. I want to live amongst people who are like me. Yeah. And I'm so excited. I don't know how long I'm going to be on the planet, but I love the idea of having that journey with clients. And I don't have to have my friends and family understand everything about me. And things will change. Yeah. But we don't have to. It's helping our clients in a way not be so emotional about it, or learn how to feel the feeling and do it anyway.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I think, you know, in my mind, maybe links back a bit to something you mentioned earlier, which is the kind of coaching aspect of our work. Now, not all therapists would see a coaching aspect to their work. I think I've always had some of that in my work. I mean, you know, after I worked with people with intellectual disabilities, I you know, late in my 20s, got into my own therapy, you know, and began to explore that area. And I had a psychology degree, so, you know, I then went and did a counselling diploma and moved into the field of counselling, but specifically addiction counselling to start with.
Right.
I worked in a treatment centre, you know, for a number of years then, and so I got very used to that idea of a very practical approach, and, you know, very, very much, you know, dealing with the issues in front of us, as well as getting to know the person very well and going all the way back to childhood and figuring where everything came from. You know, I got very used to that, you know, like in the end of it all, you've got to be quite practical about things. And so I've always had that bit of that kind of coaching, decision making, support, education, information, you know.
I love that. I love that, Eoin. I mean, I'm clapping my hands metaphorically, because it's so true. I feel as though I'm such a better person and a better therapist with what I'm doing now, because I find I'm really listening, I'm really validating, and I'm going on that journey with them. So what I wouldn't have done so much before is come up with a load of resources. Whereas this time, at the end of the session or during the session, I'll say, I think you'd really appreciate this, you know, and I'll be writing down How to ADHD, Edward Halliwell, Tony Attwood, you know, whatever suits their personality type. I say, I think you'd love this. What about this film or this TV program, or even that song? What sort of music are you into? And I just find that I'm listening so much more, and I don't know, it's such a wonderful, wonderful journey. And for that, personally speaking, at the moment where we are, because the stigma is going and we're learning a lot more, and more therapists are getting interested in neurodivergence. I'm sorry, I'm just biased, and I have to admit it. I do think neurodivergent therapists are absolutely fantastic for neurodivergent clients, because we do things in a different way, and we are different, and we understand, not just because of our personal experience, but the likelihood is we've done an awful lot of research, and we've really dug down, and we can hear what the clients are saying and see how we can help them. I mean, what do you think, really? How important do you think it is for counsellors to be educated in working with neurodivergent people? And do you think neurodivergent therapists benefit neurodivergent clients best? And it's almost a bit of a double empathy thing going on there.
Well, you know, first of all, I think it's absolutely vital that therapists are educated in all of this, and I'm trying to provide some of that at the moment. You know, I'm providing some webinars online, and planning a sort of a 10-day course from, you know, October to March. You know, so, you know, so education has always been part of my work, you know, and I'm big into it. So that's absolutely vital. And I do think that, you know, the double empathy problem is very real, but on the other hand, supposedly any therapist can learn to be empathic about any type of way of life or problem or person, or, you know, and therefore I think in principle, you know, you could be a very good therapist to neurodivergent clients without being neurodivergent. Whether you would be that motivated to in the end is of course another question, you know, for it to be a big part of your work, but you never know. But no, I definitely think that people need to have a good understanding of it, anyone in the field. I think there are great advantages a lot of the time to being neurodivergent. I find it very exciting working with autistic clients, being autistic myself, and a number of them have been with other therapists and say it's been a very different experience, you know, and a very, very positive and very empathic experience working with me. I mean, I think there's the simple fact of the, you know, mutual understanding, you know, there is the empathy comes easier. But I think there's the two other things that mainly strike me that I think are huge advantages. One we've just been talking about. I think that the natural working style of a neurodivergent therapist, if we let ourselves, is practical and pragmatic and focused and contentful and outcome focused and all those things that are a little more solution focused coaching, you know, EBT-ish while being very empathic, you know, practical, educative, you know. I think that also suits neurodivergent clients a lot of the time. But the big thing, I think, the biggest thing of all, the most exciting thing for me in the past year has been just that risking that little bit of self-disclosure, not very personal, but just, you know, where I feel that, you know, me as an autistic person, because my clients would know I'm autistic, I don't go on about it and I don't mention it, but it's there to be found if you look at my website. I'm not hiding it, you know. You know, so the sort of, I think what a lot of us growing up as, you know, neurodivergent and not knowing it as children and as adults is what we've missed out a lot on is sort of validation and models.
Yes.
You know, people who are saying, instead of saying, you what? Or why would you think that? Or why are you into that? Or that's very funny that you think that. Or, you know, whatever, all that sort of double empathy mismatch, you know. To have somebody who says, yeah, you know, absolutely. I mean, in fact, you know, to be honest, experienced it similarly myself when I was growing up, you know, and whatever it might be they're talking about, you know, office politics is a nightmare, do you know what I mean? But
so refreshing.
Acknowledging it as not just a general thing, but saying, look, as an autistic person, absolutely. I'll give you an example, even if you're interested, do you know what I mean? And again, without sharing too deeply, I'll give them some little bit. And often it's the first time they've ever heard another autistic person say me too. You know, now some of them are finding other autistic people online, but others aren't. It's literally the first time someone else has said, I know exactly what you mean.
And I think what I find is I'm just having a look. I've got 2 questions, 5 minutes each, which are really important, and I want to give you time for in the time we've got together. But you know, my mask is down and I'm very fully open and out and everything. And actually I write it in my contract as well. You know, I do have a lot of experience and I am empathic and I do have some experiences. I used to use a lot of metaphor and Dear John and other things like that, but I don't have to do that really because I've experienced a lot of things that the people coming to see me do. And I'm not sitting there going me and talking about myself. I'm not doing that, but I don't mind doing it. And a lot of therapy models, you're not allowed to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not what I do. So that makes me more of a coach in a way because I'm not your friend. I don't need to chat and to go out for a pint with you, and I can empathize with you. So on the last 2 questions, the first one is, tell me more about the work you're doing at the moment and how you're supporting the neurodivergent community, because I can't find a course, for instance, that I want it run by a neurodivergent person personally and to be really fulfilling. Tell me what you're doing.
Yeah, so as I said, apart from having a private practice, which is, you know, I have a long waiting list on, that's the reality, you know, it's there's a huge need, you know, and it's growing. The number of therapists, you know, working with this, and particularly even neurodivergent therapists, is beginning to grow, but it's not as quickly as the incredible social phenomenon we're currently experiencing in the Western world, at least, which is, you know, adult autism is coming out of the woodwork. So yeah, very busy private practice, but and I do some supervision then of other therapists. I'm particularly interested in supervising those who you know work in this area. But you know, education of other therapists has always been a big part of my work. And so I have set up some just half-day webinars, an intro and a follow-up over the past year or so, online mainly. And myself and Evelyn Welton of Awesome Training in Ireland are planning a 10-day, you know, substantial, you know, training for therapists starting in October. Again, online, you know, nowadays.
Well, that's brilliant. And I would want the links for that, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all.
Please put them on the bottom.
Yeah. We'll send you that. So, yeah, I do think that in a way, the training of therapists in this area has become urgent. really.
It is urgent, and I'm not finding exactly what I need. I don't want to go into a psychology degree or a master's. I don't need to do that. I want something that is how I work with clients on a sort of therapy model like that. So yeah, I'd love to ask you all about your interests and hobbies, but you've given us such a really, really good amount of information about what you do, and I think it's of great need to the people listening. But I think there's a very, very important message as we come to the end of today, Eoin, and that one is this question that I ask all of my guests, which is really important, which is, how would you like to see positive change at home, at school, and in the workplace to help all neurodivergent people be included and able to thrive as valuable members of society?
It's a huge question, so I'll just respond to the bit that stands out for me most these days. Both talking to, I don't work a lot with youngsters, but I work with a few adolescents. Also, working with clients talking about their own childhoods, but also, actually talking to a few teachers who have discovered they're autistic, and that is school. I think the school system, one of the most massive, incredible changes we could make, and there's been small changes, that have been made to try and help, neurodivergence, called special needs, of course, in the school system, but to change to loosen up and provide some sort of flexibility and some sort of accommodation for different learning styles and sensory sensitivity and different ways of socializing, to provide that, at primary school and into secondary school, would just make such a massive difference to, any of our experience growing up,
It would, absolutely. And I want to go even further back for that by taking action and actually making autism and neurodivergence so easy to talk about, so that parents and young people, before they even have children, can spot the possible spectrums and traits within themselves. And then they think, okay, we want to have children, there's a possibility that they might be as well. I need to know how to support them straight away. Has there been a premature birth? Has there been this going on? Did they not attach? Are they too attached? And looking at those very, very early years. And so for teachers and everyone else. And what about in the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I'm supporting some clients with that these days, and I've written letters to, managers and HR departments, just a few times in the past few months, just saying, can you provide the accommodations along the following kind of lines? I'm seeing, mixed experiences, but a couple of positive ones. I had a client, only yesterday, or a couple of late last week, just saying that, he'd begun to have, again, some good shifts in, management attitudes to what he needed, having, come out very much as openly as autistic, so again, it can transform people's lives, it can just transform people's lives. And of course, and we know this, but it's a message that has to get out there, most of the accommodations aren't that difficult, and most of the accommodations benefit everybody.
They absolutely do. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time spent together today. It's been an incredibly interesting conversation with you, and I know our listeners will discover so much more, either about themselves or about whether they want to find a therapist or a coach. And I will ask you for your links afterwards. I think you may have already given them to me, but I make sure that they're on the show notes. Right. And it's just, I can't thank you enough, and I look forward to our continued relationship, because we seem to be together on the same path.
Absolutely, no, it's great. It has been I think just the most wonderful thing in the past couple of years has been discovering other people, other autistic people, neurodivergent people, other professionals, other therapists, on the same track. I do feel like I have finally found my tribe. It's a great feeling.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much, and enjoy the spring as it's coming and the summer to follow. And I'll see you online.
Always lovely talking to you. Take care,
Eoin. Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you very much for listening to the Neurodivergence and Mental Health podcast. Links and resources will be at the end in the show notes. I very much look forward to meeting you again. Thanks for listening. Bye.